Why do women cover their hair in general? What is the reason for it?
So, to speak very generally, religious women cover their hair for different reasons depending on their tradition. Typically, it's because of a scriptural requirement, because God or the divine has ordered this to be so. And we see this most often in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And the strongest commandment about hair covering is actually in Christianity. And that's something that's surprising to most people. Most people would guess Islam, I think. But there is in Paul a very clear prescription that Christian women cover their hair. And many Christian women do in the Mennonite tradition, in the Quaker tradition, in the Amish tradition, and some evangelical traditions. So women typically cover their hair because God says so. Now we also sort of see that that's often tied to kind of patriarchal interpretations of how religiosity works, but not always. Many women who cover understand covering as a very empowering act, as a feminist act. In Christianity and Islam, there's no real link between marriage and hair covering. We do see a link between marriage and hair covering in Judaism. Not always, but often. Married women will cover their hair, and they don't typically cover their hair until after they've married, and they'll either cover, as you know, with a wig or sheitel, or a scarf. So it depends on the tradition. That's not entirely baseless as an assumption. Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and as you remember from what we talked about, it's only within the last 30 to 40 years that we see many young Muslim women adopting a covering. More Muslim women cover now, especially in Western spaces, than did 30 years ago. And that's interesting. It's not something that sort of you might expect to see. So when we talk about where hair coverings are, it's tough to say, right? It's where religious people are. When you look at Lancaster County in Pennsylvania, there are lots of hair coverings there because there are lots of Amish women there. When you look at New York City, there are lots of Orthodox women there who cover, so there are lots of head coverings there. So it just depends. I think it's very tough to say, well, here's a place where there are a lot of hair coverings. Now, in some spaces, there are legal requirements about attire for women in public. And in those places, you're going to see hair covering more often, of course. But I would say, the easiest answer is where religious women are.